So this is your chance to ask for tailored career advice from our amazing speakers. So please take advantage of that, and I'll now introduce them. So we have Prasanna Puwanarajah, who is an actor, director, writer, and former doctor. He's worked on stage at the Royal Shakespeare Company, the National Theatre, and TV in all your favourite programmes like Line of Duty, Melrose, Crown, Dr. Foster, 10%, and the French version is called Call My Agent. And he has directed his own film called Ballywater. Ritu Cabra is a public relations consultant specialising in arts and entertainment. She manages the personal profiles of actors, including Prasanna, and writers, as well as handling major national and international campaigns for clients such as Netflix, Amazon, and Apple TV. Before setting up her own company, Ritu worked for the BBC, where she managed the global publicity for shows including Doctor Who and Sherlock. Lauren Dark is a BAFTA-winning film producer at Lunar Entertainment. She was previously senior commissioning executive at Film 4, and most recently the executive producer on films including Brian and Charles, Boxing Day, Censor, and The Father, for which Anthony Hopkins won an Oscar. And our thoughts with Tony Langham, who couldn't join us today for personal reasons. So to begin with, I've introduced you a little bit there, but maybe you could just go around and say a little bit for our students and our audience, because not an audience exclusively students today, about yourself and your industry, and maybe very briefly your path to where you are now. So maybe if we go around on my screen, we'll start Ritu, then Lauren, then Prasanna.
Hi everyone. So as Hannah mentioned, I'm a public relations consultant and I specialise in arts and entertainment. My journey started 20 years ago when I was an assistant at the Discovery Channel, mainly cutting pictures of animals out of newspapers and sticking them on card. And I have since worked in various creative companies, including Penguin Random House and UK TV. And then I spent a good proportion of my career at the BBC, where I did various roles from BBC Radio 3 and classical music publicity to big global campaigns for shows like Doctor Who and Sherlock. And then 5 years ago, I set up my own consultancy, and I do a variety of things. As Hannah mentioned, I look after a small roster of actors and writers for whom I manage personal profiles. And then I work with corporate clients such as Netflix and Apple and Amazon to promote their television projects. So my job is basically to shout loudly about all the things that I'm working on to the press, making sure that the TV shows that I'm promoting get watched, making sure that they get lots of press coverage, and making sure that all the communication around those shows is handled appropriately and properly.
Thank you, Ritu. I actually used to work at UK TV as well. It's not that big an organisation, so we should chat about that because we probably have friends in common. Lauren.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, I'm a producer. I work in film and TV, and I started like most people as a runner out of university. So I did like bits and bobs when I was still at university, because I was at Sussex, and in Brighton there's a kind of a film industry, and particularly people making lots of like artist films and short films. So worked a bit while I was at university, and then went to work for Ken Loach for 5 or 6 years, and in his production company 16 Films. And that was a really good sort of producer training place, because it is an independent film production company. And so you would get to see the kind of whole life of a film, from a development and like an idea right to the sort of festival and the film sales and that kind of thing. Then I made a couple of films as an independent producer, and then I went to Channel 4 to commission for Film 4, which is their film arm. So commissioned about a third of the slate with my 2 colleagues, and then recently set up a company called The Lunar with Vanessa Kirby, and we have a deal with Netflix for film, which means that we develop and produce films intended to end up on the streamer, and also develop TV series and various other things.
Oh, sorry, I'm on mute. Thank you, Lauren. Okay, Prasanna.
Hi everyone. Nice to sort of see you all, although I've just got sort of everyone's names and little mute icons. So hello back there. Do feel free to turn your cameras on and unmute yourselves and so on, and just join in as a chat. Yeah, I used to be a doctor in the health service until about 12 years ago, and then I stopped doing that. Or technically sort of took a pause because I needed to just kind of decompress from what, as many of you guys, I think increasingly people realize is a pretty intense line of work. Almost certainly even more so now than it was then. I took a bit of a break and essentially never went back. Discovered that I preferred who I was when I wasn't working as a doctor. So now I write and direct and I work as an actor, really in any medium that will have me. So at the moment, it's kind of a mixture of directing theatre and developing some writing stuff that I'm doing for TV. And yeah, as Hannah said, I've just finished directing a feature film set in Northern Ireland. So it's a kind of mixture of things. Kind of got into it through the strangest route. Completely sort of non-industry standard, kind of scraped sideways out of the doc and into the industry. And I think the basic element of it was doing whatever work I needed to do to pay bills while I could make the things that I wanted to make. And at some point, the sort of ability of those creative things to pay your bills sort of shifts up and the need to do other things kind of shifts down. So and I'm just turned 40, so I've been doing it for like a reasonable amount of time. So yeah, that's kind of my story. It just sort of takes time and things move slowly.
Thank you. That's great. There's different 3 different entry points there, and our students might be aware. I mean, I think our students are definitely aware of trying to get internships at the organisations they want to work for, and they might be, if they're interested in film, particularly aware of being a runner. But I think there's a lot of pressure on our students to feel like they have to have it figured out already, if not right after graduating. So it's also good to hear that paths can be winding and still successful and leading to meaningful things that, you know, are a career that you enjoy more perhaps than what you immediately step out into. So for our students' sake, I think we often imagine we know what jobs have a certain aura, but if we have no experience ourselves, that aura might not be accurate. So could you give us, our students, a sense of firstly what roles they might be aiming for straight out of university, but also what they might find when they get there is different to what they assume, and especially in terms of what day-to-day actually looks like.
Sure. Shall I take that one?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there are so many jobs. I don't think it just is completely what everyone's interested in is so different. And I definitely did not know what a producer was when I was a runner. I think running as a job, if you're interested or gravitating towards on-set work, is quite a good way to work out what all the departments do, because you sort of have to help all of them. And I just think I didn't have any, even the sort of role of a producer on set was quite like curious to me, because they're just sort of watching a small monitor. And so I think I wanted to find, what I did know after doing a lot of films as a runner and an assistant director, is that I wanted to be involved in the part of the film, or the sort of storytelling part of the film, before it arrives at that moment where it's all quite scheduled and planned, and you're doing shot lists and, you know, working on something that's already been decided. So I guess it was a really interesting time of doing the onset work, but then I just wanted to sort of trace like how far back I could go and who worked on the scripts and how you get involved in that. And so I think that to me was quite a good way to figure it out. But lots of people also find them, I think if you know that already, lots of people gravitate towards the development jobs and work in script development or I think it's just also, or, you know, people are artists already and want to do design or costume or make, or, you know, something that they've sort of been working at before this sort of moment where you enter the jobs market. So I think it just is about experimentation and trying lots of different things, and particularly like short film making to me was the most useful thing, because you get to be really free with and try lots of different roles. And, you know, that's what people essentially, I think, do if they go to film school, is they just rotate, and everybody, one day you're a photographer, the next day you're an assistant director, and you just get to sort of try it out. So I would say do it as much as possible.
And I think one thing that, talking to my students, I found is that sometimes job titles don't sound like entry-level job titles, because everything's an executive. So they see these, you know, account executive job titles, and that sounds like they're the bosses. But actually, these are the entry-level roles that they are right to be aiming for. So yeah, so much is just a little opaque when you don't have experience inside. Ritu or Prasanna, do you want to speak to any of that?
I would just say that, like, I almost feel like job titles are quite meaningless. It's really about skills. You know, I'm lucky. I've worked for various big companies in my career, and a lot of the time you're crossing over different departments all the time. So it's about utilizing the skills you have, and when you do find your way into a company, either through an internship or in an assistant job, just finding out, you know, using that opportunity to find out what everyone else does, and that way you actually find out what you may or may not be interested in. Like I actually wanted to be a journalist when I was coming out of university, and I did bits and pieces of work experience, and I wrote for my student paper and that sort of thing. And then through a temp job, I ended up in a small public relations firm. And when I worked out, you know, what they did and saw what they did day to day, I thought, okay, that's something interesting for me. And then I ended up as a public relations assistant in a creative company, which was the Discovery Channel job that I took about a year after I came out of university. And but even then, you're working with different departments. I was dealing with, you know, sales teams. I was dealing with people that make trailers. I was dealing with people that buy ad space for billboards for the television shows. I was dealing with producers who are on set day to day making the shows. And through all of those interactions, you actually can work out where your skill sets, where you want to develop your skills, and where your skills are most valued and best placed. So I feel like, don't look at a job spec and think that's a very specific thing. Quite a lot of the time, especially in my job as I'm a public relations consultant, but that spans marketing, it spans social media, it spans creative content creation. Like it just spans a whole lot of things. It also spans doing a lot of emails all the time. So don't feel like you're looking at a job description and you think you don't match it. If it's something that interests you, try and find your way into that organization and then go from there.
Thank you. Prasanna.
Well, as a freelancer, no one cares about what my job title is, except my accountant, basically. And even he doesn't really care. So all that really matters is what you do and the spirit with which you do it, I find. The actors that come on set straight out of drama school into big roles have to actually work, or be encouraged to work, to really retrofit an understanding about what everyone else does. And there can be this real sense of entitlement or arrogance around the immediate arrival into what is essentially a leadership role, which it really isn't. Whereas actors who work for 25, 30 years in smallish roles, as Lauren and Rita have both said, who just kind of sit slightly at the edge of things, but see everything, just get a really clear sense of how things work. So I guess the suggestion in answer to the question would be, unless a job opportunity comes up that you find offensive or abhorrent, or something that you won't do for political reasons or personal reasons or spiritual reasons or moral reasons, never look at the size of the role, because there will always be a piece of understanding to emerge from that job. There will always be a like-minded individual who you might want to work with on something else. I mean, I can basically trace everything that I've ever done back to 2 or 3 original seeds in the ground, and whether that's a relationship with a cinematographer or a relationship with a writer or a journey towards relationships with producers and things like that. Things emerge out of the most apparently modest but actually most fertile spaces. So don't be afraid of starting small, because actually it isn't starting small, it's just starting.
Thank you. I think for our students right now, it's daunting, to think, will they get anything? It's really competitive, and they're scared about how long it's going to take them to find employment once they graduate. So I wonder, what would be your advice for them? What can they do now while they're still doing their studies? And what should they be looking to doing, once they're out the other side of studying, once they've graduated?
Well, I think depending on the type of thing, I guess I can only speak to really the sort of on-set filmmaking or development roles or even post roles. But I guess if what you think is interesting is sort of encapsulated in those spaces, then I guess the way that I did it was just to join in on any short filmmaking that I could, because there was, in Brighton at the time, there was so often people that needed a hand, and it was something I could do at the weekend. Lots of people were shooting on a Saturday, or and like Prasanna said, I just began to meet people. It felt like when I was trying to do it, like such a closed industry. Like I didn't know, I was writing letters, but it felt like everyone did and no one wrote back to you ever. And then as soon as I started to work on the short films, there was someone that would be helping out on the short film, but they were going on Monday back to their studio job doing this film or that film. And so making those relationships with people who would begin to call when their production team had said, oh, we need an extra runner, or actually was really, that sort of was where my contact space, I guess, began, in that short film scene in Brighton, just from meeting other people. And that's sort of, I think, how I've got. Remember, the other piece of advice that people used to give me would, like, find your mentors, which I think is like massively useful. But I think the really amazing leaps in my career have been just like friends or colleagues who've spoken up for me when someone has said, oh, we need someone to fill in this job. That's how I got the Ken Loach job. It was a friend of mine who I'd met. We were runners together on a film called Wolfman. And there were so many of us, our job was just to ring the bell every time the scene ended. It was like actually the most boring job. But she had she'd done this job for a week and then got another job at a comedy company. And so she'd said, oh, my friend really wants to get into producing. And I went for an interview that week. So I think a lot of the things that were the sort of making relationships that way, rather than trying to get meetings with people who are already sort of, running companies, that never really yielded that much for me. Whereas peer-to-peer sort of friends and colleagues really helped me gain experience, I think.
I think that's such good advice. And actually for our students, I'd say you already are building that network amongst your friends who are on the course, that are all wanting to do the same thing in the future, because right now you're all at the same level, but in 5 years' time, if you all continue to pursue these career paths, you are your own network of people, of friends in the industry, which over time become more and more fruitful. It's great fun for me to bring in all my old friends and work with them, and as we find ways to be relevant to each other's careers. Ritu or Prasanna, have you got any advice for what our students could be doing now in after graduation?
Yeah, I mean, echoing what Lauren said, really, it's creating those networks, it's connecting the dots. If you see it, and 20 years ago when I started, there was no LinkedIn, there was very little social media. There are opportunities to find people who are working in the spaces in which you want to be, and don't be afraid to reach out to them. The worst anyone can say is, sorry, I haven't got time. But you use, this is where social networks, I think, can be very handy, because people are able to post what they're up to on LinkedIn, for example, or whatever, and just creating networks for yourself gives you a better chance that if an opportunity does arise, then someone's got you in the back of their mind going, oh, do you know what? I met that person the other day and maybe she might like to do that thing. So yeah.
And how do we build networks when we don't feel connected and we don't feel like we know people and we haven't necessarily had people model this kind of thing for us before? Just if we feel like we don't have the advantages that some others might, how do we build those networks?
I would say that a good way to think about your personal professional network is to think of it in the same way as thinking about your career. A career is something that you look back at and that you've had, that you probably wouldn't have invented that way. I mean, if any of the four of us here were to talk about whether when we were 21 we thought we'd be at this point in our lives, we probably wouldn't say that that was where we thought we would be. So actually building a network is not so much an abstract thing of going, how do I acquire people and then use them like you're in some kind of bat cave. It's more just like who around me in the present working sphere that I'm in feels like I'm their person or they're my person, or I feel a kind of professional kindredness with them. And then it's about the beginnings of conversations. And like I say, everything starts small. So it's just a case of going, I know people who would just go along to see theatre shows in pub theatres with 50 seats, but they'd always make sure they went along on the opening night, just so that they could kind of see whether there was anyone who was in that play, who had written that play, who had just kind of struck a harmonic with them. And not for the cynical reasons of like, how do I get something out of this? But just because it's like, it's interesting, isn't it? To kind of be in a broader, adjacent creative conversation about something. And what you then discover is networks sort of form around those conversations. So it's not about building the network, it's about having the conversations and the dialogue, putting yourself into spaces that you think might be interesting for you and seeing what conversations arise from that. I'm just looking at this question here from Mel Parker, who's talking about where a degree in fine art may lead in the industries and what might benefit that degree. And I think what I'd say, Mel, is to reframe the question in your mind a little bit as to what are you interested in doing, and what are you what gives you excitement when you think about whether I might get up in the morning and do that. Because you'll probably find that actually your degree feeds into that, and then you can start to shape your next step, whether it's I mean, in the case of, if any of you were, and this is just I'm just as a random example, if any of you were interested in playwriting, I'm just going to put a couple of things in the chat there, which are just playwriting awards for emerging and brand new playwrights, and those are the sorts of things that you might apply for those for 10 years. You might write a short play once a year for 10 years while you're working in another job. And it might be that play number 9 becomes the one that gets you into a conversation that is quite interesting for you. So yeah, I think make it about what your interests are and just begin to like nose into the next space of what might follow.
And I
would agree, because I feel like networking for a lot of people feels like well, there's kind of exploitative or kind of grubby, but actually it's just working with the people that you like and know, and working with my friends is great.
None of us work in offices, we just sort of work in our house, and so you're not having those water cooler conversations, they're called, where stuff happens because you're in a physical environment with people. You have to kind of go out and find the physical environment, which has obviously been quite hard in the last couple of years. But that really all a network is it's an office space that doesn't have an office. Just like-minded people who are kind of going in the same direction, pushing out into a space together in different ways.
Some of you have both been employed and also either gone freelance or gone and set up your own thing. Do you have any advice for our students who think that they might have that in them, that they might want to build something of their own?
I think you need to know what it is you want to build. I think where I would never have been able to set up my own company at the start of my career. I didn't even really know where my skills lay or what kind of career, like Prasanna was saying, a career is something you look back on. You don't, I could never have envisaged 20 years ago where I'd be right now. But it's about understanding what you can, well, for me anyway, what you can, what service you can provide to people. What can you offer people that will make them want to work with you? And once you've worked that out, and you've developed your network and you're having conversations with people, then it's taking that leap of faith and saying to yourself, right, I'm gonna do this, and I feel like things I've got enough in my armory here to create something. Whether that be your network, whether that be your skill set, whether that be whatever, and it all comes together when you decide to finally take that leap and do it. I would also say being organized is super helpful as well. Just day-to-day running of your own business just requires being organized, or a really good assistant, but I don't have one of those right now.
Yeah, and I guess you sort of you have to sort of run even your freelance life almost as a business, in that you have to sort of invoice for the work you've done, keep tabs on, you know, when that payment has been made and that kind of thing. So I think one thing that felt quite important, sort of in the same spirit as experimenting with like the types of role there are, but also what feels good for you about the structures around you. So I really enjoyed the freelance years, like in some ways, and also found them really hard in other ways. And I think as soon as I came into a sort of institutional space like Channel 4, it was interesting to feel how that, just to feel the differences in what it felt like to have a kind of proper support sort of structure around, and salary every month, and like it was just a very different feeling. And then I think there are other sacrifices you make, maybe like, you know, when you're a freelancer, you can pick to an extent the types of, at a certain point, like the types of material that you work on, and as a producer. So it's just like, how all of what you need around you to feel sort of happy in your workplace.
So you've brought up quite a few general skills that are not field specific skills, not subject specific knowledge, but general kind of attributes, characteristics and basic skills, even just like sending a lot of emails, being organized. And I think a lot of our students don't necessarily, they don't know how to value the skills they already have, because they're aware of, you know, it's easy to be aware of lack. But could you talk some more about the value of those things they may already have within their skill set that's going to serve them really well?
I would say like basic things like being able to summarize information quickly. It's literally like the skill I use every day, whether it's pitching, a profile interview to a journalist, or pitching a TV show to a journalist, trying to convince them to write about it. Being able to tell someone quite quickly why they should listen to you is hugely important for what I do. No one likes people who are, if I phone a journalist, they've got 5 seconds to hear what I have to say. So it being succinct, to the point, knowing what you're trying to tell someone, and being able to summarize it quickly, whether that's on email or in a phone call or via WhatsApp or whatever, hugely useful. And I think that comes, that's just something that comes with practice and being able to develop your written skills and all of that sort of stuff. So that's not a public relations specific thing, I don't think. I think it's applicable to a lot of creative roles, especially within the slightly more corporate sector that I work in.
Music to my ears. This conversation I have with my students all the time, so you're just backing me up. Thank you.
Yeah, honestly, summarizing information quickly is basically what I spend a lot of time doing. And just diplomacy as well. You know, I spend a lot of time on set when I do publicity stuff, and making friends with, you know, the ADs and the producers and the runners, and because at the end of the day, I'm going to suddenly say to them, okay, I need the lead actors to do some social media, you know, behind the scenes stuff. and everyone sort of rolls their eyes at me. But if you've made friends with everyone, then they're much more amenable to helping you get the things that you need to get done. So just, yeah, manners and diplomacy.
Students, this is why we continue to force you to do group work, even though you hate it. Developing those diplomacy skills.
Oh,
sorry, go ahead, Prasanna.
No, I was going to say, just to pick up on what these guys are saying about like brevity and like being really succinct. I sort of have this thing about like 3-line emails, because I get quite anxious, I think, when a long email arrives from someone that I don't know, introducing themselves and saying, I'd love to be in this show that you're directing, or keep me in mind for future things, because I feel like I have to meet it with an equivalent piece of sharing, you know, because that person's taken that time and there's the whole CV and everything there. And what's often difficult is to go through and work out what the actual ask is. So the difficult thing is trying to work out who to ask for what, knowing that that person has the ability to maybe offer it to you. That really is, I think, the professional challenge. It's kind of going, who in this company is the person that I'm going to need to talk to, which is kind of weird. And what you can do is you could, like what I used to do is I used to find, like it on a company website or just by ringing the reception, I used to work out who was the most junior person in the company and just phone them and ask them. Basically, because the most junior person in the company will be delighted to tell you information that they know about the company, because basically no one else in the company will ask them to do anything except the stuff that they don't really want to do. So you can kind of say, look, you know, in my case as an actor, you might ring up an assistant agent and say, look, can you just give me the skinny on like which of the agents you think are trying to expand their list of actors, which agents do you not like very much, you know, which agents might be a little bit like, oh, I'm looking for new people, but only because they're brown, or whatever like it is you want to like sort of tiptoe around. And that person will go, okay, yeah, it's okay. Tell me about yourself, like what you need to do. And I've had amazing people who really had nothing to gain from helping a random on the phone, kind of spend 20 minutes on the phone and just take me through a kind of series of who people might be. So yeah, don't be afraid even of asking who to ask, if that makes sense. And if you start right at the bottom of a company, you'll find a nice little person in there somewhere who's very happy to help. And if not, then, you know, bad luck. But with a bit of luck, there'll be someone there for you.
Worth trying. That really preempts quite well my next question, which is that, as I said at the beginning, we're in a period of intermittent strikes, and in between them, action short of strikes. And that's because we're collectively taking issue with and action against the fact that there's a lot of inequality in academia, in terms of how much people are paid, based on gender and ethnicity and so forth, as well as just general issues around the exploitation of people's labour. So I was wondering if there's any advice that you have for our students, especially as they are looking out to try and get that first foot in the door, not feeling particularly powerful, not necessarily feeling always able to say no. Any advice from what you've seen in your industries, where they can, to help them navigate any inequalities that you've seen, and also avoid putting themselves at risk of exploitation of their labour or worse?
Such an important question. And I think, fortunately, I think you guys are in a good moment, believe it or not, for how much people are willing to listen to individual voices who are emerging rather than people in leadership. That may sound like the whole thing is solved, and I absolutely don't mean that. But I think that there is, there are more kind of channels of communication. I mean, the most kind of nuclear of them being Twitter. But I think it's harder for institutions to get away with treating their workforce badly. the disclosure mechanisms, the whistleblower mechanisms are so much more kind of trigger happy. So that's my take on the kind of context of it. That said, I personally feel, and this is really just to do with my sector and the unions in my sector, is that the unions are actually getting less good at representing their workforce. So much so that you sometimes get the feeling that what they're defending is a kind of online shop window rather than the actual nuts and bolts of the need for a union's presence, which is to defend the needs of its workforce. So I think we're in a bit of a weird crossover time where you might not necessarily get the best help you need from your union. It might be that you get it online by just asking a question online. So a question like, I've got this contract, but I think my employer's trying to shaft me on it. Can someone advise me? Might get you better advice on Twitter than it might from your union. I find it quite complicated, and I don't know whether there's a really good answer to it, but I hope that joining a union is still a good thing, but it may not be the whole answer right now.
Thank you. Ritu or Lauren, anything you want to add to that? And it can be generally about navigating, some of the challenges of the fact that the creative industries, we know from the data, are still not equal.
Completely. I mean, I do agree with a lot of what Prasanna is saying. I think that even if you're thinking about entrance to the film and TV industries, familiarizing yourself with your union is a good way to start to understand what are the kind of standards of the workplace that everybody should be so for example, even if you're looking at equity minimum wage or BEC2 minimum wage, or what you should be paid for what job role on a set, for example, and so I think they can be there's an enormous amount of information on there, and I think the biggest change, I guess, I think Prasanna's right to say there are slightly more open ears, even on the kind of call sheets now. If you work on a piece of work funded by Channel 4 or the Film Institute, I'm sure it's the same for BBC, there's just a kind of number that goes on the top of every call sheet, which is basically like a hotline for reporting and logging anything that you want to say about that production or anything that's happened on the production. So I think that's very different from when I started. And even I think I've just recently joined the Producers Guild of America because I was doing a lot more work in the States, and the same, I found it a great way to start trying to understand the landscape and what the kind of working practices are and what the where you find documentation. And so I think it is well worth a look around and making yourself familiarizing yourself with what the union is for the sort of type of work that you want to do.
Thank you. Me too.
I think I've been lucky in that I've worked for big companies, and in a way there's a certain level of protection you have when you work for a big company, in that pay grades are sort of standardized, and it's unlikely that someone who is doing a very similar job to you will be getting paid outrageously more than you. One of the things I would say is that I've had to several times call people out on I've had to challenge people on particularly recently about rates that I've been charging, because there are people that are willing to undercut you, bigger companies, for example. Like I'm a sort of independent consultant, but I work in a sphere where there are big agencies that do what I do, and a lot of people especially the bigger agencies, they're willing to send their interns who are getting paid nothing to do jobs that they're not capable of doing. And I have sort of formed a collective with other freelance publicists to basically try and call that behavior out, because it's not good for anyone. It's not good for interns that are basically being exploited doing jobs that are too big, for their current pay grade, and it's not good that people are, people like myself are being priced out because, people are willing to pay, less to those bigger agencies. So I think in a way, myself and several other publicists have created our own union, because there wasn't really a union that sat for us, where we are having conversations with various studios and networks to standardize what it is that we do, because what we do doesn't sit in the same way as someone like Lauren, who's a producer and has been a runner and an AD, etc. Those on-set roles sit slightly differently, but it is about finding a collective, I would say, that where you can channel that energy into making sure that there's no exploitation going on.
I was also just I forgot to say one more thing, which is exactly to your point, Rita, which is there are groups of people that have emerged, I think, over the last 5 or so years, with quite specific sort of points of engagement. So, for example, there's a group called Raising Films, which basically designed to provide support to anyone with caring responsibilities. There's also Women in Film and Television. There are lots of kind of groups like that I found really useful as the years have gone on, for just like, it's sort of part activism, part information sharing, and they can be really valuable.
Thank you. Okay, this is my last question before I go to the questions in the comments box, but it's maybe related. Our theme of our festival this year is Creative Industries for a Better Society. And at the degree that we teach has a very strong social justice thread throughout it. It's communication, media and culture, but that cultural studies side is very socially informed. And a lot of our students really do want to make positive contributions to society in the careers that they build for themselves. So what advice do you have in terms of how one builds a meaningful career over time and tries to take the opportunity that presents to contribute socially in what you're doing? Yeah, go ahead.
I think for me, the thing that has proved the most valuable in terms of getting a voice heard is charity governance. There's a lot that you can do as an individual creative industries worker. There's a lot that you can do in kind of small cabals, but actually the place where people, it's not so much about like where you get heard, but it's where people have to listen to you, is if you're sat on the board of a charity. And if you're sat on the board of a charity, that means that you don't run the charity, and it is usually voluntary. But all of the functions of that charity essentially have to be reported to you for you to kind of scrutinize them. And so whenever you have moments where a charity's behavior has come into question, that behavior will have gone to that board. And usually, historically, that board has been white, male, crusty, and quite right-wing. And so there's a huge movement currently to depaternalize charity governance, and there's a really brilliant movement called the Young Trustees Movement. I'm going to stick it in the thing here, one sec, which you guys probably know about. But basically, 3% of all trustees in this country are under the age of 30. And given that it's a nation that is moving to you guys, sort of through us guys, but fundamentally to you guys, it really should be that scrutiny is coming from you. It's really hard work because you hit resistance within those boards as well, who don't want to talk about issues relating to, for example, institutionalized racism, because everyone will sort of say, but we're like progressives and we vote Labour and we're all really nice and, you know, whatever. So it's attritional. It feels like going up a cliff, and it can be quite challenging. And the difficult thing for it being young people or younger people is you have to do it as a voluntary thing. can sometimes be that you're on that board because the thing that you're personally bringing is the thing that that charity needs. So you are very much on the altar of sacrifice in terms of your personal lived experience. That's hugely challenging. But if you want to engage in moving the oil tank around, for me, charity governance is the way to do it. So look at any charity, any organisation, any arts institution, have a look at their board, who those people are. And if it's a charity that you're interested in, just write the chair an email and say, I'm really interested in becoming a member of your board. Please, can you let me know when that opportunity may next arise?
That's such good advice, and advice that no speakers have actually given us before. I did it in my early 20s as well, and say, to our students, you think that you have to be already senior executive level, but you don't. There's absolutely, you just have to.
Like teaching the British Empire in schools, like there's a reason this stuff doesn't come up, because it's generally speaking better for people like us to not be on boards, by and large, for those boards to have a relatively quiet time. And the very best boards now are kind of going, okay, this needs to feel a lot harder than this. In the same way that, in a classroom, it's all well and good talking about the Romans, but we really need to talk a bit about some other stuff too, which is just harder in classrooms to deal with. So, so I would say that's, it's good. It's quite chastening. It can feel quite violent sometimes to yourself, but it's because that's where the shifts are happening.
Thank you. Okay, Ritu and Lauren, just any quick last additions to ways that our students can be looking to contribute socially as they build their careers, and then I'll go through the remaining questions quickly.
Sure. I mean, I guess that's an amazing answer, Prasanna. I think, and I totally agree. I think in terms of making change, I feel like if you want to bring an idea into the world, and particularly if you're a producer or a filmmaker or a director or anyone, you're going to probably have to love it and believe in it from like a very, very early stage, maybe for like 5 or 10 years until it gets made. And if you believe in it that much, it's probably of enormous value and like really going to be worth hearing. So I think that my idea would be to stick with the stuff that you believe in and find a way to get it made. And there'll be a lot of people that tell you like what is or isn't commercial. And I genuinely think after all of these years in the industry, I can't sort of make out that that's anything other than just like someone's opinion. So you just have to kind of keep going with the things that you believe should be in the world. And I think, and if that connects with like one person or like 1 million, it's not really about that. It's just about, and that will be, and I think, if the film and TV and anything that sort of inserts itself into a kind of cultural conversation can only be good. And if you have ideas that are social or political or emotional or anything else, I think just stick with it and believe in it and push it into the world.
I mean, starting your career working for Ken Loach must be a very good instruction in the fact that what we make can make valuable interjections in public discourse and public debate.
I definitely think, I think in terms of the kind of Cathy Come Home creation of, I think it's Shelter, isn't it? That I definitely felt that as a young person, like there is a sense of what is possible if you hit something or you hit a moment or a conversation where you use that medium to kind of communicate a message or communicate ideas that are difficult to discuss in kind of any other way. It's very powerful.
Thank you. Okay, Ritu, anything last to add before I open up the floor?
My way of doing this has just been very simple, is that it's just to like give, even doing talks like this, I wish I'd had more people talking to me about stuff when I was younger. I've been back to my old school and given a talk about stuff, and I've been part of mentor programs where people graduates who are interested in public relations get put on a program and they get mentored by a more senior person in public relations, because it's just nice to have that kind of mentor program happening, and being part of those things, even though they don't seem that as as big as being on the, you know, a charity board. I feel, you know, they can really, you know, even that having a one-to-one dialogue with someone on a mentor program can be just hugely useful, and it can spark further conversations and spark further connections. So sort of just being
not small at all. No, it's huge. It's huge. It's a question for all of us as we progress. How do we help more people like us, and more people who need the help to follow us as we break into spaces that didn't necessarily welcome us before. Amazing. Okay, I'm going to now there's been some really good, not just questions, but conversation in the chat here. So I want to thank our audience for that as well. So I'm scrolling back. Okay, so there, Prasanna brought that into the conversation beautifully, by the way. Thank you. Excellent facilitation. And Diane, who was asking about what degree in the creative industries can lead to, has received lots of lovely responses here, like the BFI network. And Tia has asked about sparking up a conversation and keeping it going, because it can be overwhelming with social anxiety. And then everybody's been jumping in, giving Tia great advice here. Give people the opportunity to talk about themselves and ask open questions. And get on Twitter if you can bear it, to join in, observe and share creative conversations, and be honest about the fact that you get anxious. That's great advice too. Okay, so just great discussion about how terrible, but also how useful Twitter can simultaneously be. So Alex, an example of this, I don't know what point in the conversation this was.
Sorry, Hannah, if I jump in.
Go ahead, yeah, jump in.
It was when you were talking about academic freedom and the striking reasons. So this specific person was suspended as a part-time lecturer for speaking. She was essentially smear campaigned as she's an advocate against the situation in Palestine.
Right, I see. Yes. Well, I think, you know, we launched the festival today at lunchtime with a fantastic presentation from disabled artists and activists who basically used the platform we gave him to talk about the discriminatory environment he finds here at Brookes, and had to say, you know, he hopes he doesn't lose his job for using the platform to say to that. So there's always something personal at stake always when we call things out. Absolutely right. There's I've had I've got a direct question to me asking if there's any capacity for further questions in the future. So I think this is an enterprise. You've been shy sending it to me, but you're being enterprising, and it's a perfect example of the hustle that we were talking about before. One of our audience is asking if any of you are looking for runners or volunteers or employing anyone at the moment, and if there is a way to contact you in the future. If so, I think all three of you are on Twitter, aren't you? Which is an appropriate way to make contact with people that you don't already have a personal connection with. But good hustle. Well done. Does anyone want to respond to that before we go?
The thing that I would say about that is, if you can make that request as you make it as specific as you can, that really helps. So, you know, I would like to be a runner on a TV show that is shot in Wales. I mean, you know, I'm just making that up, but like, just for whatever reason, like that's easier to respond to than I would like to do anything at all that you might have, because sometimes people don't really know what they have to offer until you've asked the question. So
would agree
down to what you think might be interesting is good.
Yeah, I've had several people email me via my website, message me via my website, just going, I'd like to be your assistant. and I sort of think, why do you want to be my assistant? Like, what would you like to do working with me? Like Prasanna says, be specific, because if you want to work with me and do my accountancy spreadsheet, that's one thing. If you want to work with me because you want to understand how to create relationships with journalists, that's a different thing. So if you're approaching someone, it's good to be able to say what you can offer them, and B, what you are intending to learn from them.
Yeah. So all those research skills that we've been making you put to use in your essays, you can now put them to use researching, so that you can tailor your approaches to individual employers. Thank you so much to our speakers. You are really tremendous. Our students think you're all rock stars and want to be you when they grow up. And we just really appreciate your generosity with your time and your insight and your expertise. And thank you everyone for coming. And yeah, see you at the rest of the events this week.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Good luck.
Bye.